We are back for our female series, and today's topic will be nutrition. As usual, I'll let Scott take it away. And maybe let's start with, can you explain what is the importance of balanced diet and what is balanced diet in health and fitness? Is it same in health and fitness, or are there some kind of differences? And what do you see is the definition of balanced diet that others perceive is same as yours?
I think a balanced diet's going to come down to individuals' perception, what they think is needed for what they're trying to achieve. I like overall moderation of things. I don't believe you have to eat. You'll hear the people say, I have to eat clean, eat clean. I don't really know I understand what they're referring to, but there's not clean foods and dirty foods. So it's more of a language issue. But I'm not of the belief that has to be the only way to eat. Your body is very capable of processing the foods you eat, but I think moderation becomes key. I like to kind of live by this sort of 80-20 rule, where 80% of the calories I have clients eating is going to come from a more nutritious, nutrient dense, calorically poor foods. So think like produce, butcher, the outside aisles of grocery stores, etc. And then 20%, give or take, things that you maybe are craving, maybe crave's not the right word, but things that you would consider possibly quote unquote unhealthy foods, just to avoid excessive, eating of a certain way that potentially could cause cravings and then a compliance problem with the dietary protocol they put in place. In terms of like Gen Pop or fitness related goals, I think the overall arching goal should be an energy balance to accomplish the goal. But if it's a performance-based goal versus an aesthetic-based goal, it's going to change the types of foods you need and where you're going to get them from. Because if it's a performance base, you're going to need to have more of a carbohydrate focused intake to fuel the exercise. If it's an aesthetic based goal, your performance isn't relevant. It doesn't really matter if the energy balance is accurate. So overall, it really does depend on what you're trying to do. But obviously, if you're eating a very specific quote unquote meal plan, the same thing all the time, you have to be careful that you don't run the risk of any type of nutrient deficiencies, which are very slowly happening in the background. And you won't really know there's a problem until there's a problem. And then trying to unravel that can be time consuming.
Yeah, and that brings us back to what we talked about on first video, I believe, about just run your blood test, because you never know what's where, how. Can you give an example of clean eating?
Sorry, there, the truck just rolled by. I'm out in South Carolina here for the World's Strongman, and it's noisy. What did you ask?
Can you give an example of clean diet so people understand?
Clean diet? From my experience in the demographic that I work with, clean would be people thinking that they can only achieve their goal by eating chicken breast, green beans, or fish and asparagus, and things that I don't know where the word clean comes from. I understand what they're referring to, but I don't know where generally that's the more bro bodybuilding foods. You can't diet without eating those foods, and that's just not true.
Yeah. So when it comes to the key differences, you mentioned that aesthetics will be different to performance and whatnot. And I think this is where people get lost when they come to me, for example, and what do you eat? And I tell them what I eat, and they go like, oh, aren't carbs bad for you? I'm like, dude, if I didn't eat carbs, I wouldn't be able to do what I do. But I don't train like a woman to begin with. My goal has never been looks. Looks come just because I train really hard. My goal has always been performance based. I want to sprint, I want to jump, I want to lift heavy stuff. So what are the key differences between macronutrients, micronutrients? Is there any at all for someone who is eating for health, for someone who's trying to lose weight, and for someone who's trying to be as physically empowering and capable as possible? So what are the main differences there? Are there any micronutrients I need to focus on in different stages, or?
Well, that's the thing. Like it's all going to mesh into synergistically, everything's got to work together. You can't have one and not the other. They have to come in moderation with each other. Otherwise, you're
what I'm more interested about, we talked previously, with women, you have your periods and all those kind of things. Hormonal effect is completely different. Is there something that really needs to be taken into consideration compared to probably men? Is there some kind of macronutrients, micronutrients that women need to take closer look at and not just follow what their boyfriend or friend or whatever or personal trainer tells them to do?
Yeah, definitely. Just in the sake of the fact that there's going to be, in theory, a menstrual cycle, there's going to be a loss of blood. We have to consider the possibility of, and very common, low iron or ferritin levels in females. So they need to be eating iron-rich foods or resort to supplementation. I would try not to use supplementation unless you have to. Supplementation is literally to supplement what's missing in your diet. So I think females need to include iron-rich foods, and the best place to get that is going to be red meat and green vegetables. I think females should have red meat consumption a couple times a week, and there shouldn't be any fear. There's no harm in doing that. Now, if you are quote unquote a vegan or someone that just doesn't want to eat animal meats, I get it. I'm not going to say good or bad. It really depends on the reasons behind it, if it's accurate or not. But if that's the case, then we have to look at other ways to do that. You obviously can get iron from vegetables, but the absorption and the bioavailability is just not as good. So things like, it all kind of depends on how they're eating. A lot of women are afraid to eat dairy. Now we may have calcium deficiency issues. If they're not eating meat, we may have B12 issue problems. So it really kind of comes down to overall what they are consuming and then the quantities. So there are definitely going to be differences, because men will just kind of basically will just eat, and they eat meat oftentimes, and there's just usually not that issue of a deficiency. There's usually an issue of possibly overconsumption of certain things for men. Women, from my experience, it's never an overconsumption issue. It's always an underconsumption problem. And then with things like menstrual cycles and stuff, there are certain micronutrients that you need to focus on, but I wouldn't just right away start supplementing them in. I would let my blood work that we talked about in the last video sort of determine if there's a deficiency. If there is, obviously we attack that first. And if there's not, then just having some good general guidelines. Dairy, very good protein source. If you're willing to eat it, and hopefully you are, I would incorporate some. I'd incorporate red meat. I would incorporate vegetables to get fiber and get all the micronutrients from the different vegetables. I would incorporate fruit. And basically it's coming right back to that sort of 80-20 rule that I live by. You know, if 80% of your foods are coming from these things, unless you have an issue, you're likely not going to have an issue.
So you're talking about 80-20 rule, and I have some questions about dairy and red meat as well, but I want to touch up on 80-20. Where would you squeeze those 20? 80 would be, as I understand, is like single ingredient meals that you put together yourself and cook them. It's not something ultra processed, whereas those 20% come from something probably highly palatable, something you really enjoy, maybe something already made that you just go and snack on. So where would you squeeze those 20% in your day?
That's a good question. And I don't think this is what I do. I would literally look at the client, what their goal is, and what's the best option to increase my chance of compliance. You could literally have your 20% as a meal. I don't like to use the word cheat meal. I think it just sort of puts a negative sort of connotation on food. I don't, you can call it whatever you want. I know what they mean by that. But I would just say, like, if you're 20%, if you want to take it as a daily thing or a weekly thing or a monthly thing, it doesn't really matter. Unless there's a specific goal where your acute nutrient intake is relevant for a performance thing, for example. But if you wanted a 20% error margin, or sorry, 20% sort of eat whatever you want, thing, you could have it like, I'm going to the movies, I have a date or whatever, my 20% today is going to be that particular meal. I don't think there's a general way that can be the same for everyone. It's ultimately, for me, going to come down to the compliance, and then the goal is going to help determine that. I mean, if it's a performance thing, I would probably almost bias some of that 20% towards, if it can benefit the training session, then I would put it there. If it's an aesthetic thing, it doesn't really matter, unless, you know, for example, say it was you were doing a photo shoot. If your 20%, you know, cheat meal was changing how you looked, I wouldn't want to put that where it's going to be relevant to the photo shoot. But if you want to do it on a daily, over the weekly, it really doesn't matter, in my opinion. Again, unless it's going to have a negative impact on something relevant, like the day of the shoot or the day of the event, performance, whatever.
So to me, it sounds like it's based on predominantly on psychology. So you would assess someone, how they react to foods. And I believe, I might be terribly wrong, but more towards women than men, that they would be kind of probably bought into concepts that they need to be afraid of certain foods. So you need to get rid of that, and you need to work around that before they actually go, hey, yeah, I can eat this and nothing bad is going to happen. Next thing probably comes with experimenting with yourself and understand what affects you in maybe mentally, maybe physically. If you're performance-based, okay, maybe you eat something that's highly palatable before or after training. And third, what comes out for me from this is tracking. How do you track? What tools do you use? And how do you make sure that 80-20 is implemented? You mentioned that it may be 20% in all one day, and then you do 3 weeks straight at that 80%. So how do you actually would suggest someone to track these metrics?
Yeah, and that's, again, that literally varies from individual to individual. If I have somebody that is tracking their macronutrients on a daily, they're going to literally measure their macronutrients, and they're going to take that quote unquote cheat meal, and they're going to say, okay, it's got whatever grams of carbs, whatever grams of fats, and they're going to substitute that into their daily intake. Fine, that works. Other people that are not as meticulous, and they don't need to be, they're just going to implement it based on either experience, on how it's been going in the past, based on what other metrics are tracking. Like you mentioned, what do we measure? Trend in body weight, trending calipers, etc. They might be doing it based off of that. If that's the case, you can literally just eat what you think, and we make it up during the week. Oftentimes, all I'll have a client. So I've got a wedding next weekend. It's whatever buffet or whatever it is. How do I make sure I can not regress? Realistically, you're not going to regress from eating once, no matter what you ate. You'd see a scale blip, no question, but you could see a scale blip from under eating, from over salting, under sleeping. Like, lots of things could have an acute effect on the scale weight. But in terms of putting on adipose tissue from a meal, it's not happening. So we can literally just say, okay, if we're tracking energy balance over the week, say you need 15,000 calories a week, if you aren't sure what next weekend looks like, but you know there's going to be a lot of food, you can take the days prior, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday, and just reduce a little bit of something, I would never reduce your protein, but you can reduce a little bit of your fat or your carbs or both, and just sort of create a buffer. And then when that weekend comes, you can just have at it. And at the end of the day, it's just going to come out in the wash. You won't have lost any progress, but what you will have done is messed up your patterns in terms of, if you're tracking body weight, that's going to get messed up. Even calipers, if you change things acutely, drastically enough, you can actually affect calipers, but it's minimal. It's a millimeter here or there. But that's why I think, and I mentioned in the videos prior, like, it's important for females to get an idea of average body weight over time, not focusing on a one-time check, because too many things can factor in. And what you'll see oftentimes is females are just afraid to eat carbohydrates because they'll be eating a certain way for however long, and then go out with their friends or go out on a date or whatever they're doing and have carbs that they haven't had recently, and the next day they weigh more, and they will surely check their weight after they've done something that's different from the norm, and they'll see that up, and that usually sets them off. And I think it's just a false perception of regression in their progress, because it's really not. It's just a fluctuation in body weight. Like, if you ate a cookie that you don't normally eat and your weight went up the next day, you would now associate cookie equals weight gain. And it's not really that simple. like I said earlier, you could change your weight by changing when you eat, how much you ate at the time, how much you drank, how much you put salt on, how much you slept. So it's really important that they get an understanding. With my clients, I prepare them for that. I'm like, okay, we're changing training. Your next block is starting. For the first couple of days, you might induce a little bit more soreness that you haven't had in a while because we're teaching you something new. Your weight will be up. It doesn't matter. Just understand that. Or we'll be like, okay, we're going to change your macronutrient distribution without even changing your energy intake, but going from more fats to less carbs, keto, for example, or going less fats to more carbs, it's going to affect scale weight, but it's not necessarily going to affect body composition. So we have to make sure females have a metric in place that can see through that noise, just to keep them from making a premature, adjustment that's not necessary and probably detrimental for the long-term progress.
So to me, it seems like, first of all, they need to learn how to track food in some way or sort, at least to the point to understand that what you are looking at is carb source or fat source or protein source or whatnot. And another thing is your body weight will be affected for whatever the hell you do. You're not going to weigh same exact thing every single day. And I think for men, it's usually, I don't care how much I weigh as long as I look jacked. But for women, they might have this perception that they need to always progress in upwards or downwards way, more often downwards, just to feel that they are accomplishing what they're doing. When in reality, they are far easier to be affected by these small manipulations that men don't really focus on, because they don't care. They just care, can I bench 3 plates or not?
Right, 100%. And that's because men are typically, more often, I shouldn't say typically, but more often they're looking for a performance-based metric, where females are looking for, more often than not, an aesthetic-based sort of, metric, I guess. So that's very important to understand what exactly is the goal from the beginning, so we know what is the best way to track progress. Because if you're a female and your goal is performance, if you don't have to make weight, we don't even care what you weigh. It's irrelevant. But not every time, but most of the time, like a new client, like I just started with a new female last week, and during the interview processes, I kind of was feeling her out, like, what is your goal? Well, I'd like to weigh this much. So, which is a very common goal. So I asked them, when you say that, is there a reason you have to weigh that for a contest or a bet, or an event of some sort, or are you associating that weight with an image? Like, what exactly is the relevance of that weight? It's always, so far, that's where they think they look. That's what they remembered looking their best at, or whatever it is. It's always an aesthetic goal. So then I right away, kind of warn them, like, you might look the way you want to look and not come anywhere near to that scale value, because you're looking at mass where I'm looking at body composition if the goal is aesthetics. So a lot of that is just in the communication and just making sure they understand what it is they're actually asking me to do, because what they ask of me is what I'm going to deliver. So we have to make sure that that's crystal clear. And it's almost always, I just want to lose body fat or something. It's not, they just associate weight loss with fat loss and scale weight, and they don't correlate necessarily evenly.
I think the message is lost that you can look completely different at the same body weight.
Absolutely.
I have many examples like that. You talked about proteins, that you would never take that out of the diet. So how important is protein for performance aesthetics, or why is that one thing something you would never go and take out of nutrition plan? And what would be your general guidelines about, hey, this is the minimum you need to have, this is the optimal you need to have, and this is maybe if you really push your body mass, you really want to grow those mad glutes to the size of a bloody, don't know what.
Right.
Then you need a bit more of this. So what are your general guidelines? What do you think is a sweet spot for everyone, and what they should never fall down below as? And maybe is there some kind of splits that you would tell them, hey, per meal, I would really like you to hit this number at least every single meal if you can, because if you eat less than that and then count everything at the end of the day, it might not be the same. So what are your general guidelines about, hey, this is the optimal you need to have, this is the minimum you need to have, and this is maybe if you really push your body mass, you really want to grow those mad glutes to the size of a bloody, don't know what.
Right.
Is there something like that at all?
Yeah,
Walk me
I
through
believe
that.
there to be. I believe there is, and protein is Greek for priority, basically. Like we need this, and at the end of the day, ideally, we want a nitrogen surplus. Um, Protein does a lot of things. Obviously, the building blocks. So everybody kind of just just takes that as, oh, it builds muscle, but it does everything. It's the building blocks for the body, not just for muscle. It's very relevant to everything. So to run protein too low, if it happens an acute time here and there, again, it's not a big deal. This is always kind of based on averages over time, but chronically low levels of protein or intakes of protein is just going to cause an overall negative cascade effect on the body in every which way. Obviously, there's a possibility that you could have too much, but that's not super common and not very likely at all. So what I do when I'm working with clients is I base their protein intake, if I can, on their lean body mass. So I'll have calculated their body composition, ideally with through a DEX or a calipers or something like that, and then I base it on their lean body mass, and I'll go anywhere for 1 to 1.4 grams per pound of lean body mass. I don't think it's crucial. That's just the way I like to do things. You could literally just do the old bodybuilding gram per pound, and you're going to be fine. Um, then it comes down to, are you enhanced? Are you not? Are you sedentary? Are you not? What type of activity are you doing, etc. I would say if someone was pushing me for a minimum, I think probably somewhere around 0.7 grams per pound is probably as low as I would go, because you don't just need it for muscle building and muscle recovery, but your ligaments and tendons need it, etc. So if anything, going a little over is going to be fine. The other thing is protein increases the thermic effect of food. So by including protein at every meal, which I suggest you do, you're getting a boost in thermogenesis automatically just from including that with it. Is it relevant and acutely? No, but big picture, long term, which we're always trying to build like habits that are going to sustain and give longevity, that's very relevant. And then in terms of a minimum intake, it's 0.3 grams per kilo per meal is what I would shoot for. So that's going to come down to the body weight of the individual. And
So
because
expand on thermogenesis, because I don't think some people will understand that. That means basically you eat same amount of calories, but you expend some of them just
to
by
digest the
digesting them.
calories, yeah, like the thermic effect of food. So a mixed food, it's going to require more energy for your body to digest it than a single macronutrient. It's almost impossible,
Is
eat
that
a
the
single
reason why
macronutrient.
you would ask them to have certain amount of protein per meal, or is it something else as well?
I want it's that is the I can't say the main one. There's two that I think are both equally relevant. The increase in thermic effect of food is relevant. I mean, you can have that from a combination of fats and carbs as well, but it's going to be a little bit better with the inclusion of protein. But then proteins also increases satiety. So if somebody is in a energy deficit via, say, caloric intake, and compliance is tough because they're hungry, and that sometimes is reality, especially if they're trying to get contest lean, then feeling more satisfied is going to keep them going longer. Where if they're starving to the point, they're going to give in to their hunger cues. So protein actually increases satiety better than protein and fiber. So if you then take a vegetable with a lean protein source combination in a person that has a energy balance that's low, or an energy balance that's in the deficit because they're trying to get leaner, lean protein vegetable meal is ultimate because they're going to feel full. The thermal effective is going to be as high as it needs to be, and their calories are still very low because vegetables bring in fuck all, and protein, if it's lean enough, is really just minimal fat and the protein. So it's kind of a two-way thing: increase satiety and increase thermic effect of food.
So when you factor all this, how do carbs and fats come into play in terms of energy levels and overall health? What are general guidelines for just health? What are your suggestions for someone who is trying to improve aesthetics, and maybe someone who is trying to improve their performance? What are the differences, and how do they fall into place with this?
I think with females, there's lots of ways this can vary. There's just so many things to consider. It take years to try to narrow it all down, and things that I'm not even aware of all the time. But in general, if it's an aesthetic goal, protein needs to be set. So we can kind of just rule out, no matter what your goal is, we need to set your protein intake. That should be the priority. That stays, that's in stone. You can increase it. There's actually research showing that an increase of protein as much as 20 to 25% over their theoretical maintenance caloric intake didn't accumulate more body fat, because the body's just so efficient at utilizing it. And, so protein is almost like a no-brainer. It can't go wrong as long as you don't go too low. So we put that aside. And the remaining calories, if it's an aesthetic goal, it doesn't really matter if it's more fat or more carb. It almost would come down to a compliance thing, unless blood work showed certain things that needed to be considered. If there was an insulin resistance issue or something like that, you wouldn't want to push a higher carbohydrate intake on someone with insulin resistance, because it's just going to be a problem. And then from there, I would just basically gauge it on satiety and compliance to the aesthetic goal. If it's a performance-based goal, it depends on the type of performance they're trying to do. But if it's something like team sports or something where they need to be a little bit more explosive, etc., you're going to want to bias more of a carbohydrate, at least around the activity anyways, as a minimum, than fats. One trend that became very popular where I live was keto and CrossFit, because it was like high energy output, and not necessarily if the energy intake was low, because fats are very calorically dense, 9 calories per kcal, but or sorry, 9 calories per gram. But the fact that you're not putting glycogen in, the body can replete it on its own, but it can take 48 to 72-ish hours. And if you're going into CrossFit every day, you're depleting quicker than you can replete, and you're just, from a physiological point of view, you're just destroying things. But it was popular because you removed carbs, so you saw instant weight loss, not necessarily fat loss, and then you're pouring energy out like crazy because CrossFit is very intense. So you were seeing a lot of weight loss quickly, and that became very, very, captivating for the females. And then next thing you know, they're injured, they feel like shit, their hormones are not, they're not feeling great, their menstrual cycles irregular, lots of problems that took months to come out. Now that they're out, how do we fix them? And that's usually a time consuming thing. And then, you run into, okay, how much time are you willing to not see what you think is progress?
Yeah, so again, we kind of touch back on a blood test will show you a lot of what you actually can do and should do.
I think that's crucial. I think that's, as we outlined in the previous videos, like that should be, for most people, ideally everyone, that's where we want to start. We want to understand who you are physiologically, get an idea of you psychologically, basically just get an idea of who you are and what does your blood look like. What's your goal? We need to know these things right off the bat. And then we can determine the best way to approach them. And sometimes the best way is not optimal. Optimal is a tough word to use because that can vary so much. But sometimes it's the best way because it's the only way we can at the moment. But
I think this is where it's important to kind of highlight that if somebody sees these 10-week, 12-week, 16-week, or whatever transformations, that means their physiology was already set to change so quick. And you can see that on a blood test.
For sure. Or, yes, you're 100% right, but I don't think that's as common. I think more common is everyone that did the transformation got run into the ground. The ones that made the best transformation are the only ones that got advertised. And a little bit of filtering, boom, look at this magic I caused. Realistically, most of them probably suffered all the while anyways. They might not know it yet. But yeah, if they were set up from a physiological standpoint, periodized standpoint, everything's already ready to go, they could make fantastic progress right from the get-go. But that I don't think is as common as we would hope.
I would really like to see people start doing before, after, and after.
After is key, yes.
So how does it look 4 weeks after they were in the best shape of their lives?
Yeah, but I think if you're wanting, you can kind of look at that just by paying attention. It's more so in the aesthetic fitness industry. So like competitors or previous competitors, a lot of them only throw throwback pics because that's when they looked, in their opinion, the best. And what they look like now is nothing like they did. And it's
And you
because
never
they
see it.
ran their bodies the gauntlet so often that now they're in a place that they're not happy with, but they're not sure how to get out of it, because really the way they got to the stage originally wasn't an ideal, an ideal way to do it. And it just took that long to cause the physiological problems that they are now dealing with. And they're not easy to fix.
So what are some of your tips to manage portion sizes when people go out and eat? Because that probably is the biggest thing that kind of throws things into your progress way.
I think I don't want to keep saying it depends, but it obviously it always does. But if somebody is willing or has experience in tracking macros, I really do think that's a very good tool to understand. Because if you've taken the time to visualize what a measured portion of food looks like, you can start to put visual, basically, comparisons to it. And if you were measuring it and you knew what it did to your body composition, you have a good idea. And from there, I suggest people, if they don't want to be measuring, I don't measure food, and I don't want to teach people to only measure food, but it is a valuable tool to have some experience with it. But you can use things like portion sizes, with your hand, palms and thumbs. And I think the common thing is like a palm of protein, a fist of carb, and a thumb of fat, or something like that. That's a very general guideline. But again, it sort of averages over time. So if somebody doesn't want to be weighing their foods, and I understand that, I think that's a bit excessive, necessary sometimes, but a bit excessive for many of us, then you have to make sure the protein is there. And after that, it doesn't really matter. And so then what I would do is I would just be doing your thing, living your life, doing your thing, and let the measurements that you're tracking, which you should be tracking something, tell you if you are progressing the way you want to or not. And be a bit patient, because you can't see real morphological changes via a measurement in a day-to-day scenario. You have to give it a couple weeks, especially with females. We want to consider, like I talked about before, luteal versus luteal, or follicular versus follicular, because you don't want to have hormonal fluctuations causing water retention, etc., factoring into what you're measuring, because they will. So if you right away said, oh, I'm going to not measure my food, and then you check the scale and you're up, oh, well, I obviously was eating too much, and right away you stop eating as much, you might not have been. So you have to be patient and make sure that what you're measuring is what you're looking to see.
So following up on that, what are the differences in different hormonal cycles? Would there be some kind of nutritional strategies that you would adjust or suggest someone to look up, or does that not matter at all? Or is it just something that happens and you just need to go with it?
No, it's definitely a physiological process of change when the hormones change. When estrogen, escalates in the follicular phase versus progesterone, the luteal. I think the biggest factor, obviously, every female is going to have a different experience through their menstrual cycle, but it's relatively going to be consistent for them. I would think the biggest factor is just the change in insulin sensitivity throughout the phases. I have a few females where it's the juice is worth the squeeze here. Like, adjusting fats and carbs based on where they are in their cycle is worth the effort to them, because they feel that much better or they perform that much better. So it is a real thing. In the late luteal phase, PMS, you're a little bit more insulin resistant. So theoretically, you'd want to bring carbs down, bring fats up, assuming your energy balance is where you wanted it. And then follicular, opposite. Realistically, for most clients, they're fine either way, but it is theoretically optimal, if you want to use that word, to adjust the macronutrient distribution based on hormone levels. But again, it's not necessarily going to amount to big miracles. So it's almost like, is it easy for you to make that adjustment? If so, the benefits that you notice, are they worth that effort? And that's really what I encourage them to do. Is I explain it, I show them how to do it. Up to you if you want to do it. And then ultimately, I find most of the time, especially if it's not a performance-driven female, it's just a girl that wants to look good, and she has a busy lifestyle and she just wants to have a sustainable program or sustainable lifestyle longevity, I usually find they don't bother with it too much. But again, there's also the thing that's averages over time. There's nothing wrong with one day, I don't feel like eating that amount of carbs, so I'm not gonna. Well, perfect. Like, I mean, it doesn't mean that something's gonna go wrong. As long as you understand averages over time and what you're doing and why, and maybe when to implement that, I think that's the biggest thing, is just letting or explain to the females what matters, you know, almost like that pyramid of importance, like what's the most important, and then from there, what's the least. So energy balance matters the most for aesthetic goals. Macronutrient distribution, assuming protein is the same, probably matters the most for performance goals. And then from there, nutrient, you know, avoiding nutrient deficiencies is relevant for all of us. That's going to come down to basically your overall food intake. What does it mostly look like? And if it's all palatable processed foods, you're probably going to run into problems long term. But if it's more that 80-20 sort of guideline that I like, unless there was an acute problem to begin with, you're going to be fine.
So I'll try to put all in a summary. To get nutrition right, it's probably, you need to be clear about what progress means to you. There might be some changes in hormonal cycles, but most likely they are more psychological than physiological, that you need to look at in terms of changing your diet, because it's going to affect you in a long run anyway. So those small fluctuations are not as important as bigger goal. And then you need to learn how to track, even if you have kind of ideas that you should never track. Good is to understand what is what, and what is going to have, what kind of effect is going to have on your body. Don't be afraid to eat a little bit off clean nutrition, and prioritize your protein over everything.
Yeah, I agree with that. With a little exception, some females tracking calories can actually present a bit of an issue with, you know, I don't want to say eating disorders, but disordered eating. And so, but that's a very specific individual. And it's hard to say who would do that or who wouldn't. I mean, obviously, I feel that out during the interviewing process and have an idea. If I feel that tracking is going to lead to a problem, we're not going to do that. I don't want to encourage any type of disordered eating habits. And it is unfortunately very common, but it's also seemingly more common in the aesthetic-driven fitness industry than in general population. So there is risk of that. And if that is a scenario that you're in, where weighing food is a trigger, don't weigh your food. You have to figure out another way. Hopefully have other metrics that we talked about in play that can help show you progress or not. And again, that patient thinking is going to become important, because if you don't have concrete data, then you have to allow the adaptations and average over time to sort of reveal themselves before you start making adjustments. And that can be a little bit more time consuming. Or if you have concrete data, you can just theoretically make mathematical adjustments and then put them in play. So that's slippery slope for some people, but again, that's going to be highly individual.
Yeah, I believe, well, that's my belief now. So that from all these videos we have done so far, main things that people need to focus on is patience.
Just relax. I mean, yeah, just relax.
Yeah.
Put the few staples in play. It's not anywhere near as difficult as media portrays it to be. There's no magic here. I mean, everyone's physiology is a little bit different, but all in all, we're humans, so the systems all function the same way. And you may need to get finicky with certain things, but that's like the sprinkles of the icing on your cake. You still need to bake that cake. And so if you don't have the basics in play, forget it. You're going to be forever spinning your wheel. So yeah, I think just be patient, put these staples in play, and let them show you what they're doing, because they're going to do what they're going to do.
Yeah, and other things that comes up repeatedly feels like it's health. So focus on being patient and focus on staying healthy, because the goal is not to get in shape at cost of your health. Goal is to be as healthy as you can be and look amazing. which is possible only if you do it over extended period of time, instead of doing crazy crash diets to get ready in a bikini, just so you disappear in your tracksuit afterwards for next 6 months because it backfired massively.
Right. And then whatever healthy is to that individual is basically the concept they're going to be working from. That's going to be different for each person. But yeah, you're right. The biggest thing is we don't want to have this backfiring rebound that just derails them, because that's what you're seeing a lot in the fitness industry. And then they're stuck in this physiological and psychological kind of vicious, negative spiraling down scenario that's, it's just hard on them, and they're not really sure how to get out of that hole they've dug. And oftentimes, from what I've seen, it's not that it was their fault in a sense. They were just doing what their coach gave them to do, and they were probably, like most humans are, fantastic clients, and they followed the plan. It's just unfortunately that the plan was probably shit.
Yeah, it happens a lot, because more often than not, they just follow what boyfriend gave, or to personal trainer, or this and that, and never really had a proper interview. I've had many people going to me and asking, hey, can you give me a diet plan? And I'm like, I don't know anything about you. How can I give you anything? Right. It's like someone walking in a garage and telling, can you fix my car? But they don't have a car with them. I'm like, what am I fixing? I have not a clue what you're asking from me. So
it'll be just like right now with the AI. You're going to say, give me a diet that allows this, and the AI is going to spit out a potentially perfect thing, but it could also be the worst possible thing if you don't know what you need. It doesn't know. It's just going to respond to your question.
Yeah.
So
I played around a little bit with that, and I'm like, oh, my job is so safe with this.
I agree. I think it's going to, in the long run, be very good for coaches that are coaching. I do.
Yeah. No, Scott, appreciate your time as usual. And we'll carry on the next week.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome.
Thank you.